Interesting facts and historical context of Romeo and Juliet. 1. Inspired by older stories. Shakespeare didn't create Romeo and Juliet from scratch. The story was based on an Italian tale, The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet, 1562, a long poem by Arthur Brooke. Brooke's version was itself inspired by older Italian stories, particularly Matteo Bandello's Novelli, 1554. 2. Written during the early years of Shakespeare's career. Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet between 1594 and 1596, making it one of his earliest tragedies. Before this, he primarily wrote comedies and histories. The play was first published in 1597, though it was likely performed earlier. 3. The setting reflects Renaissance Italy. Although Shakespeare set the play in Verona, Italy, he likely never visited. Renaissance Italy, particularly cities like Verona and Florence, was known for political feuds between noble families, something Shakespeare adapted into the Capulet versus Montague conflict. 4. First time Shakespeare used the star-crossed lovers trope. The phrase, star-crossed lovers, appears in the prologue and has since become a standard way to describe doomed romantic couples. This theme of fate versus free will was a major philosophical debate in Shakespeare's time. 5. It features one of the earliest examples of a balcony scene. Before Romeo and Juliet, love scenes in literature often took place in gardens or indoors. Shakespeare's famous balcony scene, Act 2, Scene 2, created a new kind of romantic imagery that has since been repeated in literature and film. However, in the original play, no stage direction mentions a balcony. Juliet likely spoke from a window. 6. Elizabethan attitudes toward love and marriage. During Shakespeare's time, arranged marriages were common among noble families. Love matches were rare, which is why Romeo and Juliet's impulsive romance would have been seen as scandalous and rebellious. The idea of dying for love was also romanticized in Renaissance literature. 7. The role of plague in the story. The delay message from Friar Lawrence to Romeo, which leads to the tragic ending, is due to an outbreak of the plague preventing the messenger from delivering it. This reflects real-life quarantines in Shakespeare's England, where outbreaks of the bubonic plague often disrupted daily life and even closed theaters. 8. Performed in open-air theaters. Romeo and Juliet was originally performed at the theater or the Curtain Theater before Shakespeare's company moved to the Globe Theater in 1599. These open-air playhouses relied on natural lighting and exaggerated acting since there were no elaborate sets or stage lighting. 9. Women were not allowed to perform. In Shakespeare's time, all roles, including Juliet, were played by young male actors. Women were not legally allowed to act on stage in England until the late 1600s. 10. The play has inspired countless adaptations. From Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, 1996, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, to West Side Story, 1957, Shakespeare's tragedy has been retold in many ways. Even operas, ballets, and anime have adapted the love story for new generations. 11. The play's genre mixes comedy and tragedy. Though Romeo and Juliet is classified as a tragedy, the first half of the play includes elements of comedy, witty wordplay, mistaken identity, and humorous characters like Mercutio and the nurse. This light-hearted tone makes the sudden shift to tragedy in the second half even more impactful. 12. The role of astrology and fate in the play. The Elizabethans strongly believed in astrology and fate, which is reflected in the play's frequent references to the stars and destiny. The phrase, star-crossed lovers, suggests that Romeo and Juliet's love was doomed from the start due to celestial forces beyond their control. 13. Shakespeare's use of iambic pentameter and sonnet form. Most of the play is written in iambic pentameter, a poetic meter with 10 syllables per line, 5 pairs of unstressed and stressed syllables. Romeo and Juliet's first conversation is written as a perfect Shakespearean sonnet, 14 lines, A B B C D C D F F G G rhyme scheme, symbolizing their immediate romantic connection. 14. The character of Mercutio was likely inspired by Italian commedia dell'arte. Mercutio's witty, over-the-top personality resembles stock characters from commedia dell'arte, an Italian theater tradition featuring exaggerated comic figures. His Queen Mab's speech, Act 1, Scene 4, is one of the most famous soliloquies in the play. 15. Juliet's age was unusual for an Elizabethan heroine. Juliet is only 13 years old, which may seem young today but was not unheard of in Renaissance Italy for noble families arranging early marriages. However, most Elizabethan heroines in Shakespeare's plays were older, making Juliet's character unique in her youthful innocence and passionate love. 16. Shakespeare's play may have been a response to Elizabethan family feuds. England's noble families, much like the Montagues and Capulets, often had long-standing feuds. The Wars of the Roses, 1455 to 1487, between the houses of Lancaster and York was still a part of English memory. Shakespeare's message about reconciliation in the final scene may have resonated with audiences dealing with real political and family rivalries. 17. The play's first printed edition contained many errors. The first version of Romeo and Juliet was published in 1597 as a bad quarto, a poorly transcribed and possibly pirated version of the script. The more accurate and widely accepted text comes from the 1599 good quarto and the 1623 first folio, which was published after Shakespeare's death. 18. The influence of courtly love traditions. Romeo's initial love for Rosalind follows the tradition of courtly love, a medieval concept where a man worships a woman from afar with unrequited devotion. However, Romeo's love for Juliet breaks from this idealized notion, becoming a more passionate and impulsive romance. 19. The nurse's role reflects the reality of wet nurses in Renaissance Italy. Juliet's nurse, a comic yet deeply emotional character, represents the common practice of noble families hiring wet nurses to raise and breastfeed their children. In many cases, the nurse was closer to the child than the biological mother, explaining her strong bond with Juliet. 20. A real Juliet's house exists in Verona. In Verona, Italy, there is a house known as Casa di Giulietta, Juliet's house, complete with a famous balcony. Though it has no real connection to Shakespeare, it attracts thousands of tourists every year, many of whom leave love notes, or touch the statue of Juliet for good luck in love. 21. The play features one of Shakespeare's most famous stage directions. Although Shakespeare's plays don't typically include elaborate stage directions, Romeo and Juliet has one of the most famous. They fight. Tybalt falls. Act 3, Scene 1. This simple but dramatic moment marks the turning point of the play, Romeo's impulsive revenge against Tybalt. 22. The role of music and dance in the play. Music played a vital role in Elizabethan theater. In Act 4, Scene 4, Capulet calls for musicians play during the wedding preparations. Live music would have been performed in Shakespeare's time to enhance the scene's emotions. Renaissance theater often incorporated dance as well, and the Capulet's Masquerade Ball, Act 1, Scene 5, would have been a lively moment on stage. 23. The influence of Petrarchan love poetry. Before falling for Juliet, Romeo is infatuated with Rosalind. His speeches about her are heavily influenced by Petrarchan love poetry, which was popular during Shakespeare's time. Petrarchan lovers often exaggerated their suffering, idolized their beloved, and spoke in paradoxes, just like Romeo does early in the play. O brawling love! O loving hate! Act 1, Scene 1. However, Juliet's love is more direct and sincere, breaking away from the artificial style of courtly love. 24. Shakespeare may have performed in the play. It is believed that Shakespeare himself acted in some of his plays. While there is no solid proof, scholars suggest he might have played Friar Lawrence or Lord Capulet in early productions of Romeo and Juliet. This was common practice in Shakespeare's theater company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, where playwrights often took on minor roles. 25. The first performance was likely in 1596 or 1597. The earliest known performance was recorded in 1662, but scholars believe Romeo and Juliet was first staged in the mid-1590s, soon after it was written. Since early performances were held in open-air theaters like the Curtain or the Theatre, predecessors to the Globe, they relied on daylight for lighting and minimal scenery, placing greater emphasis on the actors' performances. 26. It was one of Shakespeare's most popular plays during his lifetime. Unlike some of his later works that gained recognition posthumously, Romeo and Juliet was an immediate success. By 1597, it had already been printed in quarto form, which suggests high demand. The play was performed regularly and remained a favorite in the 17th century, influencing later works on love and tragedy. 27. The name Montague may have been inspired by real Italian nobility. While Shakespeare took much of his inspiration from older Italian tales, some believe the Montague name was inspired by the Montecchi family, a noble house in medieval Verona. There is little historical evidence of a real-life family feud like the one in the play, but the name would have been familiar to Renaissance audiences. The Capulet name, however, has no known historical connection. Shakespeare likely invented it. 28. The play has one of the shortest time frames in Shakespeare's works. Most of Shakespeare's tragedies unfold over weeks or months, but Romeo and Juliet takes place in just 5 days. Sunday, the feud, the ball, Romeo and Juliet's meeting. Monday, the balcony scene, their secret marriage, Mercutio and Tybalt's deaths, Romeo's banishment. Tuesday, Juliet's potion plan. Wednesday, Juliet is found dead. Thursday, the tragic deaths of Romeo and Juliet. This compressed timeline heightens the intensity and contributes to the characters' impulsive decisions. 29. The play challenges traditional gender roles. Although Juliet is young and expected to obey her family, she often defies traditional female roles. She proposes marriage to Romeo, rather than waiting for him to do so. She speaks openly about her desires. Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds. Act 3, Scene 2. She takes control of her fate by drinking the potion, even though it terrifies her. Meanwhile, Romeo's emotional nature and tendency to weep over love were more traditionally associated with women in Elizabethan times, making him a unique male protagonist. 30. The tragic ending reflects Elizabethan beliefs about fate. In Shakespeare's era, many people believed in predestination, the idea that lives were already planned by fate. This is echoed throughout the play with references to destiny. Prologue. A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Romeo, Act 5, Scene 1. Then I defy you, stars. Despite their attempts to shape their own future, Romeo and Juliet seem doomed from the start, reinforcing the Renaissance belief that fate was inescapable. 31. The play's famous poison scene had realistic parallels. In Renaissance Italy, poisons and sleeping potions were commonly discussed in medical and alchemical texts. The idea that Juliet could take a drug that mimicked death for 42 hours wasn't far-fetched. Some believe Shakespeare was inspired by actual sleeping potions used in medieval Europe, which contained ingredients like mandrake root and opium. 32. Queen Elizabeth I likely saw the play. As a major patron of the arts, Queen Elizabeth I was a known supporter of Shakespeare's works. Since Romeo and Juliet was performed in London during her reign, it is highly likely that she watched it at least once. Some historians even suggest that the play's themes, young love defying authority, might have subtly reflected tensions within Elizabeth's own court. 33. The play has influenced language and culture worldwide. Many phrases from Romeo and Juliet have become everyday expressions. What's in a name? Often quoted when discussing identity. Parting is such sweet sorrow. Used when saying goodbye. A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. A metaphor for things being the same regardless of labels. Even the concept of star-crossed lovers has been used in countless films, books, and songs, showing the play's lasting impact. 34. The play has been performed in nearly every language. Since its first translation in the 18th century, Romeo and Juliet has been adapted into nearly every major language, including Latin, Japanese, Russian, and Swahili. It remains one of the most widely performed and studied plays in the world, proving its universal appeal. Thanks for listening and watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Like this video. It helps more people find these classic stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think.